All right, let's talk about 1917. Imagine a dynasty, 300 years old, supposedly rock solid, and it just crumbles in months. We're diving into the story of the Russian Revolution today, an event that didn't just flip one country upside down, it basically redrew the entire map for the 20th century. So let's get right into it. So you gotta ask, how did it all unravel so fast? Well, it really boils down to three simple words: peace, land, bread. This wasn't some fancy political slogan, you know? This was the raw, desperate cry of a nation. People were literally starving for an end to the war, for a tiny piece of land to farm, and just for a loaf of bread to eat. It's that basic and that powerful. Okay, so what actually set the stage for this massive upheaval? Let's dig into the why. We're going to look at the deep cracks that were already spreading through the foundation of the Russian Empire, turning the whole thing into a tinderbox just waiting for a match. You know, by the early 1900s, the Russian Empire was basically a giant pressure cooker with the lid screwed on way too tight. And this wasn't some sudden thing. Nope, we're talking about decades of simmering anger, political, social, and economic problems, all building up pressure and heading toward one inevitable explosion. So let's start at the top. Politically, everything, and I mean everything, was in the hands of one guy, Tsar Nicholas II. He had this parliament, the Duma, but honestly, it was basically a suggestion box he never checked. If you dared to oppose him, you were silenced. On top of that, the whole government bureaucracy was famously corrupt and just inefficient. It all added up to this massive, deep-seated frustration with a system that felt totally, completely broken. And, you know, this political rot was perfectly mirrored by this just staggering social divide. Russia was a country of total extremes. On one side, you've got this tiny group of super rich aristocrats living in incredible luxury, totally clueless about how everyone else lived. And on the other side, millions and millions of peasants desperate for land. They even had a name for it, land hunger, and city workers grinding away in awful conditions for wages that were a joke. It wasn't just a gap between rich and poor, it was a chasm. Okay, so what's adding fuel to this fire? A really backward economy. I mean, the rest of Europe is booming with industry, and Russia is just lagging, way behind. The cities were getting packed with workers, all crammed into terrible housing, working insane hours, and then they couldn't even get enough food. These kinds of desperate conditions, well, they're the perfect breeding ground for some really radical ideas. And then came the final blow, World War I. For Russia, this war was just a complete and utter disaster. We're talking millions dead at the front, supply lines totally collapsing, and people back home literally freezing and starving. This whole catastrophe just shattered whatever tiny bit of faith people had left in the Tsar. The war didn't cause all the problems, no, but it was absolutely the thing that pushed the entire empire right over the edge. All right, so the stage is set. Let's jump right into the explosive year of 1917. And what's so wild about this is that it wasn't just one revolution. It was two. Two huge revolutions in a single year, each one completely changing the course of history. I mean, the speed of all this is just breathtaking. It kicks off in February, and not with some big political movement, but with women workers in the capital, Petrograd, who are out on the streets protesting because there's no bread. The real game changer, though, was when the soldiers, the guys who were supposed to protect the Tsar's power, refused to shoot the protesters and actually joined them. A few days later, Tsar Nicholas II abdicates. And just like that, poof, 300 years of Romanov rule, gone. But here's the thing. Getting rid of the Tsar didn't magically fix everything. In fact, it created a whole new mess, this power vacuum people called dual power. So you had the official provisional government, which looked good on paper but had zero real support. And then you had the Petrograd Soviet, a council of workers and soldiers who actually controlled the capital and wanted big changes, like yesterday. It was like a ship with two captains trying to steer in totally opposite directions. It was pure chaos. And right into the middle of this chaos steps this small but incredibly disciplined and radical group, the Bolsheviks. Their leader was this brilliant, absolutely ruthless strategist, Vladimir Lenin. And for them, this power vacuum wasn't a crisis. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. They came in with a really simple, really powerful message. We'll take decisive action and we'll end this stupid war right now. And this all leads to the October Revolution. Now, this was totally different from the spontaneous protests back in February. This was a swift, planned, calculated coup. The Bolsheviks just moved in, seized all the important buildings in the capital, arrested the government, and in one bold move, they declared that they were founding the world's very first socialist state. Okay, so the Bolsheviks are in charge. Now what? What did that actually mean for Russia and for the world? Let's dive into the impact of their victory and see how it sent shockwaves across the entire planet for decades to come. Well, the Bolsheviks did not waste a single second. They immediately started issuing these radical decrees. Bam, land goes to the peasants. Bam, factories go to the workers. Bam, Russia is out of World War I. But their grip on power was immediately tested by a horribly brutal 3-year civil war. Their Red Army fought and won, and literally from the ashes of that conflict, they started building a brand new nation. And the final piece of the puzzle clicks into place in 1922. That's the year they officially create the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. You know it as the USSR. So the revolutionary period is over, and a new, massive 70-year-long experiment in creating a communist state had just begun, an experiment that would pretty much define the rest of the 20th century. So let's talk about the impact here, because it was monumental. For Russia itself, it completely wiped away the monarchy and put this totally new kind of state in its place, one built on the planned economy. But the impact on the rest of the world? You could argue that was even bigger. It basically unleashed communism as a global idea. It inspired revolutions all over the place, and it set up the central conflict for the next 70 years, the Cold War. Think about it. That epic struggle between capitalism and communism, the one that would go on to shape the lives of literally billions of people and define world politics for decades, it was born right here in this one event in 1917. It's just a powerful reminder of how the events of a single year in a single country can create echoes that last for an entire century.